thank you all very much for coming. My name's Jamie. I've been in Palestine for the last 3 months, working with an organisation called the Ecumenical Accompaniment Programme in Palestine and Israel, which is like a human rights group that I'll talk more about later. So I'm basically, like Helen said, I'm here to tell you about my experiences so that you guys have a better understanding of what the situation is like in Palestine at the moment, and hopefully encourage you guys to take action to help promote Palestinian rights as well. So maybe a good place to start is, what is Palestine? Now, we've got a map up on the screen. You can see Israel, which is coloured in peach. Israel is about the same size as Wales, just to give you an idea of scale. And then Palestine is split into two parts. You've got the Gaza Strip to the west and the West Bank to the east. It's called the West Bank because it's the west bank of the River Jordan, which runs from north to south. Now, I was stationed in the West Bank, more specifically Bethlehem, a city that some of you might have heard of, and the surrounding villages as well. So quite a lot of travelling around in the surrounding area. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time talking about a woman called Ilham and her story. Ilham didn't want me to show a photo of her, so I've just got a picture of her home here instead. She and her husband have 3 daughters, aged 7, 4 and 3. They built this home together about a year ago, so in 2017, the land that they'd inherited. And when I went to visit Ilham, they'd just been issued with something called a demolition order by the Israeli military. Now, what this basically is a piece of paper that the military delivers to you, which announces their intent to demolish your home at some point in the future. And I'll talk a bit later about why they do this. But the way that Ilham described the situation is by saying, "You are never safe. You never know when they will come." The reason she said this is because from the moment that you get this piece of paper, you don't know when the military will come back. It could be years later. It could be just a few hours. So from that moment on, your life is very much on edge. You don't know when the military will come back. These are some photos from inside their home. Now, Ilham was given an interesting opportunity that many people don't get. She was told that she could delay the demolition by paying a fine of about £7,000. She wasn't told how long for, but she felt that she needed to do it to give herself some peace of mind. Unfortunately, she was told just afterwards that the delay was only for 2 weeks. And in early September, the military came to destroy their home. I got some footage here that I took from outside the demolition. This is basically of some Palestinians protesting what's going on, trying to resist the demolition from taking place. Those explosions that you heard were stun grenades. They're designed to incapacitate through a large sound, basically, so a big explosion. And you can see that this woman here was knocked unconscious by one of those grenades. Overall, there were 20 Palestinians who were injured that morning. This was the military using tear gas and stun grenades and rubber-coated bullets, which are steel bullets that have a thin coating of rubber, which basically means that they're less lethal, less likely to kill you, but they still break bones, and they often they can kill you if they hit you in the head sometimes. But yeah. This is Ilham's home after the demolition. She was too upset to really talk to us that morning. We spoke to her cousin Misa instead. Misa said, "There's no future, there's no next step, just rebuilding." Now, in the UK, we don't generally build our own homes. We usually, if we're wealthy enough to do so, we buy them. But maybe we can still relate to Ilham's situation, because buying a home in the UK is a pretty big deal. You save up to pay for a deposit over many years. You then go through the process of actually choosing and buying a home, and then again you're paying off a mortgage over many years again. And the reason you do this is that you hope that from that moment on you can move on to the next stage of your life, free from paying rent or whatever. So maybe you want to save up for your retirement, or you want to send your kids to university, or some other project. But in Palestine you get stuck at that point because you get your home and you have to go back to the start. I should say, Ilham will be charged for this demolition by the Israeli military. Their policy is to charge several £1,000s for Palestinians whose homes they've destroyed. I said before that the military generally doesn't give any warning for demolishing. Ilham was fairly lucky in that she was given about an hour to remove as many belongings as she could. And you can see that she and her family managed to remove quite a few pieces of furniture, and then whatever was left inside was destroyed. Now, the last I heard from Ilham, she and her family were living in like a temporary shelter, a sort of tent, in the garden for where their home used to be. Ilham's home was one of 4 destroyed that morning. You can see pictures of the other 3 here, and also an agricultural container that was destroyed too. Overall, there were 36 Palestinians living in these homes, including 18 children. And this wasn't an isolated incident. So you've got some statistics here from the last 10 years of demolitions in the West Bank. Now, I should say these demolitions don't take place in all of the West Bank. It's only in something called Area C, which is 61% of the land, and East Jerusalem as well. And also, these structures aren't always homes. So they include, schools, medical clinics, mosques, a whole range of different buildings. But you can see from the red columns the number of people that were living there. So this is something that happens, quite a lot over a sustained period. This wasn't just a one-off thing. So why is Israel demolishing Palestinian homes? Now, if you ask the Israeli government or the Israeli military why they're doing this, they would basically say that there's nothing particularly unusual going on here. And they would point to countries like the UK, and they would say, it's quite common for countries to have systems of planning permission. So in the UK, if you own some land and you pay for the construction of some building, maybe it's a home, that's not enough. You need to get planning permission from the council, or whichever authority it is. And if you go ahead and build without that permission, maybe it's appropriate for the council to demolish this building. So they kind of say, this situation is very much the same as what you have in the UK. There's a couple of big differences. Firstly, as the UN puts it, it's nearly impossible for Palestinians to obtain building permits in most of Area C. Now, to put a number on this, it's a success rate of about 1.5%. So, as you imagine, these permit applications are a pretty big deal. They cost thousands of pounds, several years to go through. So, as you might imagine, when Palestinians understand the success rate, they don't bother applying. They get to the stage where they need to have a home to raise their children or whatever, and they go ahead and build anyway, because they need to have somewhere to live. And then they risk demolition, like I showed you earlier on. The second thing is that there's no accountability to Palestinians. In the UK, if you've got a council that has a crazy planning policy and they're just demolishing homes left, right and centre, there's various levels of accountability, ways in which you can change the system, and then at the end of the day you can vote in new councillors if you're really not happy. Palestinians don't have any of this. They don't have a vote in Israeli elections, they don't have any accountability whatsoever. So that's another key difference. So what's really going on then? Now this is the position of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. They're an Israeli human rights group that are campaigning to end home demolitions in Palestine, and more generally to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And what they say is that the demolition of Palestinian homes is politically and ethnically motivated. The goal is to limit development and to confine the 4 million Palestinian residents of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza to small enclaves, thus ensuring Israeli control and the Judaization of the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, if you put this statement to the Israeli government or the Israeli military, they would probably deny that this is the case. All that I can say from my experience, from my 3 months in Palestine, is that this is entirely consistent with what I have seen. And home demolitions are one small part of an occupation that I do not have time to describe in all its detail. There's a whole range of other things. You've got land confiscations, where Israel seizes private Palestinian land, declares it to be Israeli state land. You've got restrictions of movement, roadblocks and checkpoints to limit movement of Palestinians around, make it more difficult to travel. You've got what's called the separation barrier, which is basically a big wall that's built more or less along the border with Israel and Palestine, but actually 85% of this wall is inside Palestine rather than on the border. And this wall annexes a lot of Palestinian land to the Israeli side, making it very difficult to access that land. And then you've got the Israeli military attacking Palestinians in their homes or in their schools. And then on the other side, you've got Israeli settlements, which are basically towns and cities that are built on Palestinian land in Palestine, but have Israelis living there. And the Israeli government encourages these settlements in various ways with tax breaks and other things. So this is all consistent with this idea that what Israel is trying to do is limit the development of Palestinians and make it difficult to live there, encourage Palestinians to leave, and then move Israelis in instead. Another thing to point out is that these home demolitions are a war crime. We've got an excerpt here from the 4th Geneva Convention. It says that any destruction by the occupying power, which in this case is Israel, of real or personal property belonging individually or collectively to private persons is prohibited, except where such destruction is rendered absolutely necessary by military operations. Now, I was there that morning when Ilan's home was destroyed. There was no military necessity. The only military operation was the one to destroy her home. I'm going to change gears slightly now and give you a brief overview of the Israel-Palestine conflict. I should say that I'm not an expert in Middle East affairs or anything like that, so and this glosses over a lot. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me at the end. So I've chosen 3 key dates, or what I see as key dates. At the end of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Now, the Ottoman Empire was on the side of Germany, and as a result of losing the war, they basically ceased to exist, and most of the land was divided up between the UK and France. Now, Palestine, which is now Israel and Palestine, was under the control of the Ottoman Empire for many hundreds of years, but at this point it came under the control of the UK. It was one of the areas that we got control over. Now, over the next few decades, there was a large migration of Jews from around the world, from Europe, Russia, America, to what is now Israel. And obviously the Holocaust played a big part in why they were moving. And in 1948, as we were leaving, as we were pulling out our army and leaving the area, they declared the State of Israel. And what followed was a big war, basically, between this new State of Israel and the surrounding countries and Palestinian militias. And the result of this war was that, Israel survived, and they call it the Israeli War of Independence. And the borders of Israel were defined by, where the armies ended up after this war. And to what is now Palestine, so the West Bank was under control of Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was under control of Egypt. Now, Palestinians have a different name for this war. They call it the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. Now, the reason they call it this is because during this war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians left their homes in what is now Israel, because, there was a war going on. And but when the war ended and they tried to return, Israel prevented them from doing so, and it's never allowed them to return since 1948. So this is the beginning of the Palestinian refugee problem. Another key date is 1967. There was another war between Israel and, again, the surrounding countries. And as a result of this war, Israel gained control over a few more territories, including the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And this is when the Israeli military occupation of Palestine began. I'll just talk a bit more about who EAPPI is now and what we do. So the idea of the programme is to send normal people like myself out to Palestine for 3 months at a time. So like I said, I have no expertise, I got a few weeks of training to give you the gist of what's going on over there. And whilst we're there, we try to do 3 things. We monitor and report on human rights violations. So we're on the ground, we see things as they happen, and we pass this information on to like the UN and other organisations. We aim to protect with our visible presence. Now the idea is that if we are wearing our uniforms that say EAPPI on them, and the Israeli soldiers see us there, then they're more likely to behave better, is the idea, because they know that we're passing that information on, and that maybe somehow down the line there could be consequences for them, or maybe they just feel bad psychologically. But that's the idea, to protect through our presence. Another thing we do is advocating for an end to the occupation. There's various ways we do this, so we write blog posts, we give talks when we come back to the UK, tell people about what the situation is there, and encourage people to take action to help promote Palestinian rights. And I'll talk more in a minute about what you guys can do to help. On a day-to-day basis, a lot of my work was visiting Palestinian communities, visiting people like Ilam who are having issues because of the Israeli occupation. I have lost count of the number of people I visited who have either had their homes demolished or have been given a demolition order by the Israeli military. But there's a whole range of other issues. So just as an example, this is a picture of us visiting a village called Rosh Aida. There's about 30 people living there. All of their buildings have demolition orders, so the military could turn up at any time and destroy whatever they like. But they have other issues as well. Because of the restrictions on building, they don't have connectivity to water or electricity, so this is a big issue for them. And they also have the Israeli military coming into their village once or twice a week to carry out training exercises, which again is not ideal. If you imagine a military kind of coming to your streets and carrying out training exercises right outside your home, that's going to be highly disruptive and potentially quite dangerous as well. Another thing we do a lot of is escorting kids to and from school. You might be able to see from this picture why it's necessary. You've got some kids walking along this path here to school, which is towards the left, and you've got an Israeli military jeep parked nearby. And then up the path you've got some more soldiers. Now in some schools across the West Bank, the military will do this. They will, park themselves near where they know kids will be walking past to get to school. And most days they will just be there. They'll just be hanging around, not doing anything, just be there. Some days they will attack the kids with tear gas or other weaponry. Sometimes they will arrest kids. Sometimes they'll attack the schools or the teachers. So we try to be there whenever we can to diffuse the situations, try and give our protective presence to these kids and encourage the soldiers to behave better and not attack the kids, basically. This is some more footage that I took from outside the checkpoint in Bethlehem. Now I mentioned the separation barrier between Israel and Palestine, which is like this big wall, and there are certain points in this wall where you can get through, and these points are called checkpoints, where you get checked as you're passing through. Now, in Palestine, unemployment is really high. It's about 20% in the West Bank. And so many Palestinians need to go to Israel to get their livelihoods, to find jobs. And in the Bethlehem checkpoint, you've got about 7,000 Palestinian workers going through every day to get to work. But as you can see from the video, it's not an entirely pleasant commute. You've got this long channel with a wall and a fence, where people have to queue for long periods. And it can be very unpleasant and potentially dangerous as well, with the crush of the crowd behind you. So we go there a few days a week to monitor the situation, to see how the soldiers behave towards the Palestinians. They often lock the turnstiles for 10, 20, 30 minutes at a time, which obviously makes things much worse with the queues and everything. And they also sometimes let through certain groups of people, like disabled people, old people, children. So we try to get them to open this gate, this extra gate, to allow these people to, not have to go through this. But unfortunately, they very rarely open this extra gate. This is my final slide. What can all of you do to help promote Palestinian rights? Now, the answer is quite a lot, because the UK has very strong ties with Israel. We've got strong economic, diplomatic ties that we can use, that we can leverage to encourage Israel to behave better and not do the sorts of things that I've been talking about. Now, I've left some sheets around on your seats that have lists of suggested actions that you can take to help Palestinians. There's a couple I'll highlight. Visiting Palestine is something that's very much appreciated. Palestinians love it when you visit and see how things are, and come in solidarity to give moral support and witness what's happening. You can sign up to email updates from EAPPI. I'll send around an email sign-up sheet in a minute, so you'll be hearing from people like me who are on the ground, seeing these things, writing about what's happening right now. One other thing I'll talk about is what action you can take to do with Canal Akmar. Now, I talked about demolitions quite a lot, and I've said that Israel demolishes Palestinian homes on a regular basis, but it's very rare that they will demolish an entire Palestinian village at once. But this is what they're trying to do with Canal Akmar. Now you can see some of the village pictured here, and you can see an Israeli bulldozer that's carrying out some of the preliminary work for the demolition. Now, last time I checked, they hadn't done it yet. It could happen any day now. But many people believe that the reason they haven't done it yet is because of international pressure. Because various organisations, governments, the European Parliament came out and made a very strong statement about it, to try and get Israel to not do this, basically. So one big thing that we can do is we can encourage our own government to take a stronger stand on this, and to say to Israel, if you do this, there will be consequences for our relationship with you. And then we can maybe encourage Israel to not demolish this village. Now, you can do this yourselves by writing to Theresa May or Jeremy Hunt, but one way which might be more effective is by writing to your local MP and asking them what they can do. It might be writing a parliamentary question, or writing to the Foreign Secretary in their capacity as MP, or signing a day motion. So that's one thing that you can do to help these villagers and maybe save this village. That's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.